So with this, I can now have my serializer.save, and then I set my author to self.authenticated user. So this authenticated user, this self.request.authenticated user actually has a pointer where we get the current logged in user. So having added this author, let's get back to testing our endpoint and debugging, of course. What we do, it's our major time as programmers. So let's have to check this out. It's list create, right? Okay, so let's activate that endpoint back. Import this. I have this right active back. So let's refresh this. So having an error that string object is not callable. Right, so we need to find what is the cause of this problem. Okay, let's look at the error log. Are we having any pointer to a file? So it's raising doing post.views.postList create view, right? Post dot list create views. So what then is here? Set permission. Have a permission is not callable. So what then could be the problem here? Let's refresh this. So when we have when we remove this, we get it to work. So what was the error again? The permission. Oh my goodness. My apologies. I have seen where the error is coming from. So this shouldn't be a string. You're meant to import this. Oh dear God. Right. So having imported this, you can go ahead. So let's go and add back this. So we can see that this works. Right. But you notice that there is no form. But when we remove that permission, when we remove this permission, you see that this guy is not an iterable. So we're still having some minute error from here. It's not an iterable. Okay, this is meant to be in a list actually. So that's the essence of this. So we refresh and that error is gone because it could be multiple, right? So the setting allows expects it to be a list, right? So when we remove these permissions, you realize that when we come here, we notice where is my views. I've removed this settings, and then we remove this, right? when we refresh this, you can see that a form appears here that expects us to create. So the essence of this form is for us to actually create a post. But then we've added some restrictions such that we want only authenticated users, and not just authenticated users. If you're not an authenticated user, you should only be able to read. That's why when we include those back, that form disappears to tell you that this endpoint requires authentication, and it required, if you're not authenticated, you can only read. So that's why we can do a get and then we see our post. So what then do we do to actually have to authenticate our users? So now we've seen how to work with post list create view, how we can utilize it to, instead of having to write multiple lines with your get, your post, you literally just utilize your generics, which has a reduced code and helps us perform everything automatically. So we've been able to look at the get request and then the post. So let's also write code for retrieving, updating, and then deleting posts. So for that, we're going to have our post detail view endpoint, right? So let's get to our code. So we're going to have another endpoint class. We're going to have post retrieve, update, destroy view. Perfect. So we're going to define our query set post.all, define a serializer, and then we define our permission classes. Then mind you, we would want to add something. So we'll want to make sure of something, then when if self or if serializer is valid, we want to restrict. There's something we want to do here such that not just that you are allowed to be authenticated before you can create post or edit, before you can retrieve or update or destroy, but we also want to ensure that before you update or delete any post, you should be the creator of the post. That's the author of the post. So if serializer dot instance dot author is not equal to the authenticated user, then we would want to have raise permission. You can't edit someone else's post. So, and if it's the same person, we want to go ahead to save the post and then return a response, success post updated. Then likewise, when we want to destroy, we customize the perform destroy. So if instance the author is not the authenticated user, you would want to prevent that. So with that, we already have with this code bundled our detail view, our update, our destroy. Now we route a URL endpoint to it, and for this to work accurately, we need to ensure that the URL allows for receiving an ID to identify which post are we actually trying to get the detail, or which post are we actually trying to update, or which post are we actually trying to delete. Right, so when we get to this, so we're having this set to PK, which in short for primary key. So if you want to have this as ID or whatsoever, You would want to customize this here by putting your lookup field and setting it to ID. But if you don't want to have that, you can work with the default, which is originally set to PK. So we have that as PK. Right, so let's get to check our code endpoint. So let's check detail. Then you see that there's no endpoint because it requires an ID. So let's first off list. So you can see the ID of the post. So we want to get the ID 1. So let's have detail and then 1. So you see that okay, it's still returning everything, which shouldn't be so. So we want only the detail for that particular. Hope that's what we're doing. Okay, so we're attaching this to the wrong class, so you might want to always check this to avoid such silly error from our auto completion. So we import this. Having imported that, we go ahead to run this again. You can see that it retrieves only the post with ID of 1. So let's retrieve post ID 2, and you see that it retrieves post ID 3. So we can also perform our updates and destroy. However, we are not currently authenticated. So with this, we've been able to see how to write our endpoint code or our view code for our create, our retrieve, our update, our delete, and then our list. Right, so quick one, you take your quiz and get right back to the course.